The dust kicked up by the morning cattle drive settled slowly over the small frontier town of Cedar Ridge, Colorado, as Sarah Mitchell stepped down from the stagecoach that had brought her from Denver. Her dark blue traveling dress was wrinkled from the long journey, and her brown hair had escaped from its pins during the bumpy ride through the mountain passes. She clutched a worn leather satchel containing everything she owned in the world, along with a letter that had changed her life forever. Sarah was 23 years old and had never been married, which made her practically an old maid by frontier standards. Back in Denver, she had worked as a seamstress in a small shop, barely earning enough to pay for her tiny room above the bakery. When the letter arrived 3 months ago, responding to her advertisement in the matrimonial section of the Rocky Mountain News, she thought her prayers had been answered. The letter was from Thomas Brennan, a cattle rancher who owned land outside Cedar Ridge. He wrote in careful handwriting about his need for a good woman to help him build a life on his ranch. He promised her a comfortable home, security, and the chance to raise a family in the beautiful Colorado mountains. What he did not mention in any of his letters was that he had a business partner who would complicate everything. As Sarah looked around the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, she felt a mixture of hope and nervousness. The town was smaller than she had expected, with just a few wooden buildings lining the wide dirt road. There was a general store, a saloon, a small church, and what looked like a boarding house. Mountains rose up on all sides, their peaks still covered with snow even though it was late spring. She was looking around for someone who might be Thomas Brennan when she heard a deep voice behind her. "Excuse me, miss. Are you Sarah Mitchell?" Sarah turned around and found herself looking up at one of the most handsome men she had ever seen. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with thick black hair and bright blue eyes. His clothes were clean but practical, the kind worn by someone who worked with his hands. He held his hat in his hands and was looking at her with a gentle smile. "Yes, I am Sarah Mitchell," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Are you Mr. Brennan?" The man's smile faltered slightly. "No, ma'am. I'm James Sullivan. Tom Brennan is my business partner. He sent me to meet you because he had to ride out to check on some missing cattle. He should be back this evening." Sarah felt a flutter of disappointment. She had been looking forward to meeting her future husband after months of correspondence. But James Sullivan seemed kind enough, and she supposed it made sense that ranch work would not always wait for stagecoach schedules. "I see," she said. "Well, I suppose I should find somewhere to stay until Mr. Brennan returns." "Actually, Tom asked me to bring you out to the ranch," James said. "We have a spare room in the main house, and Tom's housekeeper, Mrs. Garcia, is there to look after you. It would be proper, and you would be more comfortable than at the boarding house in town." Sarah hesitated. She did not know this man, and it seemed strange to go to a ranch with someone who was not her intended husband. But she also did not have much money left for a hotel room, and if Mrs. Garcia would be there as a chaperone, it should be acceptable. "All right," she agreed. "That would be very kind." James helped her load her small trunk onto his wagon, and soon they were driving out of town along a winding dirt road that led up into the foothills. As they rode, James told her about the ranch and the surrounding area. "Tom and I have been partners for about 5 years now," he explained as the wagon bumped along the rough road. "We started with just a few head of cattle and have built it up to one of the biggest ranches in this part of Colorado. It is hard work, but the land is good, and we have been lucky with the weather." "How did you and Mr. Brennan become partners?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. James was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to tell her. "We met during the war," he finally said. "We were both in the cavalry, fighting against the Confederates. Tom saved my life during a battle in Virginia, and I saved his during a skirmish in Tennessee. After the war ended, we both came west looking for a new start. We pooled our money and bought this land together." Sarah nodded. Many men had come west after the Civil War, looking to forget the horrible things they had seen and build new lives. She could understand why two men who had fought together would want to continue as partners. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the scenery became more and more beautiful. Pine trees covered the hillsides, and wildflowers bloomed in the meadows. Sarah could see why someone would want to make a life in this place, despite the isolation and hardships. "It is beautiful here," she said. "Yes, it is," James agreed. "Tom always says this is God's country, and I think he is right. There is something about this land that gets into your blood. Once you have lived here for a while, it is hard to imagine being anywhere else." After about an hour of driving, they came around a bend in the road, and Sarah got her first view of the Brennan-Sullivan Ranch. The main house was a large two-story building made of logs and stone, with a wide front porch that looked out over a valley filled with grazing cattle. There were several other buildings scattered around the property, including a barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and what looked like a workshop. "Tom and I built most of this ourselves," James said with obvious pride. "It has taken us 5 years, but we finally have something worth showing for all our work." As they pulled up to the house, a middle-aged Mexican woman came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She had graying hair pulled back in a bun and kind, dark eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "This must be Señorita Mitchell," she said in accented English. "I am Rosa Garcia. Welcome to our home." Sarah climbed down from the wagon and shook Mrs. Garcia's hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Garcia. I am pleased to meet you." Come inside," Mrs. Garcia said. "You must be tired from your long journey. I have prepared a room for you, and there is fresh water for washing." James carried Sarah's trunk into the house, and Mrs. Garcia led her up a wooden staircase to a comfortable bedroom on the second floor. The room had a large window that looked out over the valley, a bed with a colorful quilt, and a washstand with a mirror. "This is lovely," Sarah said, meaning it. The room was much nicer than anywhere she had lived in Denver. "Señor Tom wanted you to be comfortable," Mrs. Garcia said. "He has been very excited about your arrival. He talks about you all the time." Sarah felt a warm feeling in her chest at these words. It was nice to know that her future husband was looking forward to seeing her as much as she was looking forward to seeing him. After Mrs. Garcia left her alone to freshen up, Sarah unpacked her few belongings and changed into a clean dress. She washed her face and hands in the cool water from the pitcher and tried to do something with her hair. Then she went downstairs to find James and Mrs. Garcia in the kitchen. The kitchen was large and warm, with a big stone fireplace and a wooden table that could seat 8 people. Mrs. Garcia was stirring something in a pot that smelled delicious, and James was sitting at the table drinking coffee from a tin cup. "Feel better?" he asked when he saw her. "Much better, thank you," Sarah replied. "Mrs. Garcia, is there anything I can do to help with dinner?" No, you are a guest," Mrs. Garcia protested. Sit. I will bring you some coffee." Sarah sat down across from James and accepted the cup of coffee that Mrs. Garcia brought her. It was strong and hot, exactly what she needed after the long journey. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Mitchell," James said. "Tom has told me some things from your letters, but I would like to hear it from you." Sarah was not used to talking about herself, but something about James made her feel comfortable. "There is not much to tell," she said. "I grew up on a small farm in Illinois with my parents and 2 brothers. When I was 18, my parents died in a fever epidemic, and my brothers went west to try their luck in the gold fields. I went to Denver and found work as a seamstress." "That must have been hard, being on your own so young," James said gently. "It was," Sarah admitted. "But I managed. I had to. When I saw Mr. Brennan's advertisement in the newspaper, it seemed like a chance for a better life." James nodded. "Tom is a good man. He will take care of you." Something in his tone made Sarah look at him more closely. There was an expression in his eyes that she could not quite read, but it made her feel a little confused. Before she could think about it too much, Mrs. Garcia announced that dinner was ready. She had made a delicious stew with beef from the ranch, along with fresh bread and vegetables from her garden. As they ate, James told Sarah more about life on the ranch. "We run about 2,000 head of cattle," he explained. "In the spring, we drive them up to the high pastures to graze for the summer. In the fall, we bring them back down and sort out the ones to sell. It is a good business if you know what you are doing and do not mind hard work." "It sounds like you and Mr. Brennan have done very well for yourselves," Sarah said. "We have been blessed," James agreed. "But it has not always been easy. The first winter we were here, we lost nearly half our cattle in a blizzard. We almost gave up and went back east." "What made you stay?" James looked out the window at the mountains, now purple in the evening light. "This place gets into your soul," he said simply. "Once you have seen a sunrise over these peaks, or watched elk grazing in the meadows, it is hard to leave." After dinner, they sat on the front porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The air was cool and fresh, filled with the scent of pine trees and wildflowers. Sarah had never experienced such peace and beauty. "Mr. Sullivan," she said after a while, "may I ask you something?" "Of course. And please, call me James." "Are you married?" James was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I have not found the right woman yet." "Surely there must be some ladies in town who would be interested in a successful rancher," Sarah said. James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "There are not many unmarried women in Cedar Ridge, Miss Mitchell, and most of the ones who come west are looking for something that I cannot give them." "What do you mean?" "Security, I suppose, a guarantee that their lives will be comfortable and safe. I can work hard and provide for a family, but this is still frontier country. There are no guarantees out here." Sarah thought about this. It was true that life on the frontier was uncertain. But surely that was part of what made it exciting, the chance to build something new and meaningful. "I think," she said carefully, "that some women might value the adventure more than the security." James looked at her with interest. "And what about you, Miss Mitchell? Are you looking for security or adventure?" Sarah considered the question. It was something she had thought about during the long journey from Denver. "Both, I suppose," she said honestly. "I want a home and family, but I also want to feel like I am building something important. I want my life to matter." James nodded slowly. "I think you and Tom will suit each other well." But as he said it, Sarah noticed that he did not quite meet her eyes, and she wondered what he was not telling her. That night, as she lay in the comfortable bed in her new room, Sarah listened to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. She could hear cattle lowing in the distance, the hoot of an owl, and the whisper of wind through the pine trees. It was so different from the noise and bustle of Denver, but she found it soothing. She thought about Thomas Brennan, the man she had come to marry. In his letters he had seemed kind and thoughtful, with a good sense of humor and strong values. She was looking forward to meeting him and starting their life together. But she also found herself thinking about James Sullivan. There was something about him that intrigued her, something deeper than just his good looks. He seemed to understand the appeal of this beautiful, harsh country, and he had treated her with respect and kindness from the moment they met. She told herself sternly that such thoughts were inappropriate. She was here to marry Thomas Brennan, not to daydream about his business partner. Whatever she might feel about James Sullivan, it did not matter. She had made a commitment, and she would honor it. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, she could not quite shake the feeling that her life was about to become much more complicated than she had expected. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of bacon cooking downstairs. She dressed quickly and went down to the kitchen, where Mrs. Garcia was preparing breakfast. "Buenos dias, señorita," Mrs. Garcia said with a smile. Did you sleep well? Very well, thank you, Sarah replied. The mountain air must agree with me. See, it takes some getting used to, but it is good for the lungs, Mrs. Garcia said. Senor James has already gone out to work with the cattle, but he said to tell you that Senor Tom should be back by noon. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought of finally meeting her intended husband. She helped Mrs. Garcia prepare breakfast and then spent the morning exploring the house and the immediate area around it. The house was well built and comfortable, with solid furniture that had clearly been made to last. There was a parlor with a stone fireplace and shelves lined with books, which surprised Sarah. She had not expected to find such a good library on a remote ranch. Looking through the titles, she found works by Shakespeare and Dickens, as well as books about agriculture, animal husbandry, and Western history. Many of the books showed signs of heavy use, which told her that whoever owned them was a serious reader. Those belong to both Tom and James, Mrs. Garcia said, coming into the parlor with a dust cloth. They are both educated men, not like some of the cowboys who come through here. They went to school? Sarah asked. See, before the war. Senor Tom studied at a college in Missouri, and Senor James went to school in Ohio. They are not just cowboys, these men. They have brains, as well as strong backs. Sarah was impressed. In his letters, Thomas Brennan had mentioned that he was educated, but she had not expected to find such an extensive library or to learn that both men were college-educated. Around 11 o'clock, she was sitting on the front porch reading one of the books when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Looking up, she saw two riders coming up the road toward the house. One of them was James, and the other must be Thomas Brennan. Sarah set down her book and smoothed her skirts, trying to calm her suddenly racing heart. This was the moment she had been anticipating for months. As the riders drew closer, she could see that Thomas Brennan was a handsome man, though not as tall as James. He had sandy brown hair and a mustache, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge. The two men dismounted and tied their horses to the hitching post in front of the house. James said something to his partner that Sarah could not hear, and then Thomas Brennan looked up at her and smiled. Miss Mitchell, he said, removing his hat and climbing the porch steps. I am Tom Brennan. I cannot tell you how pleased I am to finally meet you in person. Sarah stood up and extended her hand. Mr. Brennan, the pleasure is mine. Thank you for inviting me to your beautiful ranch. Thomas took her hand and held it perhaps a moment longer than was strictly proper. Please, call me Tom, and I hope you will be very happy here. I am sure I will be, Sarah replied, though she was aware that James was standing slightly behind Tom, watching their exchange with an unreadable expression. I apologize for not being here when you arrived yesterday, Tom continued. We had some cattle wander off into the high country, and it took longer than expected to round them up. James took very good care of me, Sarah said, and Mrs. Garcia has been wonderful. Good, good, Tom said. Well, now that I am back, perhaps we can spend some time getting to know each other better. James, would you mind taking care of the horses? Of course, James said quietly, and led both animals toward the barn. Tom turned back to Sarah with another smile. Shall we sit down? I would love to hear about your journey and how you are finding our mountain country. As they settled into chairs on the porch, Sarah found herself stealing glances toward the barn, where James was unsaddling the horses. She told herself to focus on Tom, who was, after all, the man she had come to marry. But something about the way James had looked at her during their introduction left her feeling unsettled. Tom was charming and attentive, asking her about her trip and telling her about the ranch and their plans for expansion. He was clearly intelligent and successful, and he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. I hope you will not find it too lonely here, he said at one point. I know it is very different from city life. I think I will love it, Sarah said honestly. The peace and beauty here are like nothing I have ever experienced." "I am glad to hear that," Tom said. "A woman who cannot appreciate this country would never be happy as a rancher's wife." They talked for another hour, and Sarah found that Tom was everything his letters had promised: kind, intelligent, and clearly devoted to making a success of his life on the frontier. By all rights, she should have been completely satisfied with her choice. But as they spoke, she found her eyes drifting toward the barn and the other buildings where James was working. There was something about him that she could not get out of her mind, and that troubled her more than she cared to admit. Over the next few days, Sarah settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She helped Mrs. Garcia with cooking and household tasks, though the older woman insisted she was still a guest and should not work too hard. Tom was attentive and kind, taking her on rides around the property to show her the cattle and the beautiful scenery. He talked about their future together, the improvements he wanted to make to the house, and the family they would raise. Sarah should have been completely happy. Tom was everything a woman could want in a husband: successful, handsome, intelligent, and clearly devoted to her. But she found herself increasingly troubled by her growing awareness of James Sullivan. It was not that James was trying to win her attention. In fact, he seemed to go out of his way to avoid being alone with her. When Tom was showing her around the ranch, James would find work to do elsewhere. During meals, he was polite but quiet, letting Tom lead the conversation. But Sarah could not help noticing the way he moved with easy grace, the gentle way he handled the animals, and the thoughtful expression that crossed his face when he thought no one was watching. She also began to notice small things that suggested the partnership between Tom and James was more complicated than it first appeared. When they discussed ranch business, there was sometimes tension in their voices. James would suggest one course of action, and Tom would overrule him, sometimes with an edge to his tone that made Sarah uncomfortable. One evening, about a week after her arrival, Sarah was sitting on the porch reading when she overheard an argument between the two men near the barn. "We cannot afford to take that risk, Tom," James was saying, his voice frustrated. "If we lose cattle to rustlers again this year, we could lose everything. And if we do not expand now, we will never have another chance like this," Tom replied sharply. "The Patterson Ranch is perfect for our needs, and the price will never be this low again. But we would have to mortgage everything we have built to buy it. One bad winter, one disease outbreak, and we would lose it all. Sometimes you have to take risks to get ahead, James. That is how business works. Not when it puts our entire livelihood in danger." Sarah heard Tom's voice rise. "I am the senior partner here, and the decision is mine to make." There was a long silence, and then James spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. "We built this place together, Tom. We should make decisions together, too." "We did build it together," Tom agreed. "But I invested more money at the beginning, and legally that makes me the senior partner. You knew that when we drew up the papers." Sarah heard footsteps moving away from the barn, and she quickly returned to her book, not wanting either man to know she had overheard their argument. But the conversation troubled her. She had assumed that Tom and James were equal partners, but apparently that was not the case. The next morning, Tom announced that he had to ride into town on business and would not be back until the following day. After he left, Sarah found herself alone with James for the first time since her arrival. She was in the garden behind the house, helping Mrs. Garcia pick vegetables for dinner, when James approached them. "Mrs. Garcia, would you mind if I borrowed Miss Mitchell for a little while?" he asked politely. "I thought she might like to see the new foal that was born yesterday." Mrs. Garcia smiled and waved them away. See, go. The vegetables can wait." James led Sarah to a small pasture near the barn, where a mare was grazing with her day-old foal. The baby horse was all legs and awkward grace, staying close to its mother, but occasionally venturing a few steps away to investigate the world around it. "Oh, how beautiful," Sarah breathed, leaning against the fence to get a better look. She was born just after sunrise yesterday, James said, pride evident in his voice. This is the first foal from our best breeding stock. If she grows up to be half as good as her mother, she will be worth a fortune. They watched the foal in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Sarah turned to James with a question that had been bothering her. James, may I ask you something personal? He looked wary but nodded. Go ahead. Why did you never marry? You are clearly successful and you seem to be a good man. I find it hard to believe that no woman has ever caught your interest. James was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the pasture. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. There was someone once, back in Ohio, before the war. Her name was Elizabeth, and I thought we would spend our lives together. But when I came back from the fighting, I was different. I had seen things, done things, that changed me. Elizabeth said she could not marry a man who had been hardened by war. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for him. I am sorry. That must have been very painful. It was, James admitted, but maybe she was right. War does change a man. I am not the same person I was when I left Ohio. None of us are the same people we were before difficult experiences, Sarah said gently. That does not make us unworthy of love. James looked at her with surprise, as if he had not expected such understanding from her. You are very wise for someone so young, Miss Mitchell. I am not that young, Sarah protested, and I have had my own share of difficult experiences. Tell me about them, James said, leaning against the fence beside her. Sarah found herself talking about things she had never discussed with Tom, or really with anyone. She told James about watching her parents die of fever, about the loneliness of working in Denver, about the fear that she would end up a spinster with no family and no security. I know Tom is a good man, she said finally. I know I should be grateful that he wants to marry me, but sometimes I wonder if I am making the right choice. James turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. What do you mean? Sarah hesitated, knowing she was treading on dangerous ground. I wonder if I am settling for security instead of following my heart. And where would your heart lead you? James asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt her cheeks flush. She knew what he was really asking, and she knew that her answer could change everything. I do not know, she whispered, which was not entirely true. James stepped closer to her, and she could smell the scent of leather and soap that always seemed to surround him. Sarah, he said, using her first name for the first time, I need to tell you something. Before he could continue, they heard the sound of horses approaching the house. James immediately stepped away from her, his face resuming its carefully neutral expression. That will be Tom coming back early, he said. We should go back to the house. But as they walked back toward the house, Sarah's heart was pounding. She had seen something in James's eyes that told her she was not alone in her confusion. Whatever he had been about to say, she suspected it would have changed everything between them. Tom was indeed back early, and he seemed to be in an excellent mood. He had successfully completed his business in town and had even better news to share. I have spoken with the preacher in Cedar Ridge, he announced over dinner that evening. He has agreed to perform our wedding ceremony this Saturday. I know it is short notice, but I see no reason to wait any longer. Sarah nearly choked on her water. This Saturday? But that is only 4 days away. I know it seems sudden, Tom said, reaching across the table to take her hand. But we have been corresponding for months. We know we are suited to each other. Why wait? Sarah glanced at James, who was staring down at his plate with a carefully blank expression. Mrs. Garcia was beaming, clearly delighted by the news. I suppose you are right, Sarah managed to say, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. 4 days should be enough time to prepare. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of wedding planning. Mrs. Garcia immediately began making lists of food to prepare and invitations to send to the neighboring ranches. Tom talked about the improvements he wanted to make to the house now that he would have a wife, and the cattle he planned to buy with the profits from this year's sales. Through it all, James remained quiet, contributing little to the conversation. Sarah found herself watching him out of the corner of her eye, trying to read his expression, but his face revealed nothing of what he might be thinking or feeling. That night, Sarah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. In 4 days, she would be married to Tom Brennan. She would become the wife of a successful rancher, with a beautiful home and the promise of a comfortable life. It was everything she had dreamed of when she answered his advertisement. So why did she feel like she was making the biggest mistake of her life? The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Mrs. Garcia threw herself into wedding preparations with the enthusiasm of a general planning a military campaign. Neighboring ranchers and their families began arriving to help with the preparations and to attend the ceremony. Sarah was fitted for her wedding dress, a beautiful creation that Mrs. Garcia had been secretly working on since her arrival. She met the other ranch wives, who welcomed her warmly into their small community. Everyone seemed genuinely happy about the upcoming wedding, and many commented on what a good match she and Tom made. Through it all, James remained politely distant. He helped with the practical preparations, moving furniture to make room for the wedding guests, and ensuring that there would be enough food and drink for everyone. But he avoided being alone with Sarah. And when their eyes met across a crowded room, he would quickly look away. Sarah told herself that this was for the best. Whatever feelings might exist between them, they could never be acted upon. She was going to marry Tom, and James was his business partner and best friend. Nothing good could come from acknowledging the attraction that seemed to exist between them. But on Friday evening, the night before the wedding, Sarah found herself unable to sleep again. She slipped out of bed and went downstairs to get some water from the kitchen, moving quietly so as not to wake anyone. She was surprised to find James sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. He was staring out the window at the moonlit mountains, lost in thought. "I could not sleep either," Sarah said softly. James looked up, startled. "Sarah, I did not hear you come down." "I did not want to wake anyone," she said, moving to the water pitcher and filling a glass. "Are you nervous about tomorrow, too?" James was quiet for a long moment. "In a way," he said finally. Sarah sat down across from him at the table. "James, what were you going to tell me the other day? In the pasture? Before Tom came back?" James looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him struggling with himself. Finally, he sighed and ran his hands through his hair. "I was going to tell you that I think you deserve better than a marriage of convenience," he said. "You deserve to marry someone you love, someone who understands you and appreciates your spirit." "And do you think Tom does not understand me?" "Tom is a good man," James said carefully, "but he sees you as a solution to a problem. He needs a wife to help him build his ranch and raise his children. I do not think he sees you as a person with your own dreams and desires." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes because she suspected James was right. In all their conversations, Tom had talked about their future in terms of what he wanted to accomplish. He had never asked her what she wanted from life, beyond a home and family. "And what do you think I want?" she asked quietly. James looked directly into her eyes. "I think you want to be valued for who you are, not just for what you can provide. I think you want a partner, not a protector. I think you want someone who will see your intelligence and your courage and be grateful for them." The words hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt her heart racing. She knew that James was describing exactly what she wanted, and she also knew that he was describing the way he saw her. "James," she whispered. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Sarah, I know I have no right to say this. Tom is my partner and my friend, and you are going to be his wife tomorrow. But I cannot let you marry him without knowing that you have a choice. What do you mean? I mean that if you do not want to marry Tom, if you would rather take a chance on something else, I will help you. I have enough money saved to buy you a ticket anywhere you want to go. Or, he paused, taking a deep breath. Or you could stay here with me. I know it is not the secure future that Tom can offer you, but I would do everything in my power to make you happy. Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. Was James saying what she thought he was saying? Are you asking me to marry you instead? She asked. I am asking you to follow your heart, James replied. Whatever that might mean. Sarah felt torn in two. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to throw caution to the wind and choose love over security. But another part of her was terrified of the consequences. What would happen to your partnership with Tom? She asked. James's face was grim. It would probably end it. Tom would never forgive me, and I could not blame him. And what would happen to the ranch? Tom would buy out my share, or I would sell it to him for whatever he could afford to pay. Either way, I would lose everything I have built here. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. I cannot ask you to give up everything for me. You are not asking, James said gently. I am offering. Sarah, I have been in love with you since the moment you stepped down from that stagecoach. I know it is wrong, and I know it complicates everything, but I cannot watch you marry Tom without telling you how I feel. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw the truth of his words there. She also saw the pain he was trying to hide, the knowledge that he was probably losing her forever. I love you too, she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. James closed his eyes as if in pain. Then what are we going to do? Before Sarah could answer, they heard footsteps on the stairs. James quickly released her hand and moved away from the table, while Sarah wiped the tears from her face. Tom appeared in the doorway, wearing his night clothes and looking sleepy. I thought I heard voices down here. Is everything all right? Miss Mitchell could not sleep, James said, his voice carefully neutral. I was just keeping her company. Tom smiled and moved to put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. Wedding nerves, I imagine. Perfectly natural. But you should try to get some rest, my dear. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Yes, Sarah managed to say. You are right. I should go back to bed. As she left the kitchen, she looked back once at James. He was staring out the window again, his shoulders tense with emotion. Sarah spent the rest of the night lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to decide what to do. By morning, she knew she had to make the most difficult choice of her life. Sarah woke on her wedding morning with a heavy heart and a decision that felt like it might tear her apart. The house was already bustling with activity as Mrs. Garcia and the neighboring ranch women prepared for the ceremony and celebration that would follow. But all Sarah could think about was the conversation she had shared with James in the moonlit kitchen. She dressed slowly in the beautiful white dress that Mrs. Garcia had made for her, trying to quiet the voice in her head that kept asking if she was making the right choice. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a bride who should have been glowing with happiness. Instead, she looked pale and uncertain. There was a soft knock at her door, and Mrs. Garcia entered carrying a tray with breakfast and coffee. Buenos dias, señorita, she said with a warm smile. Today you become a married woman. How do you feel? Nervous, Sarah answered honestly. Mrs. Garcia set down the tray and came to stand behind Sarah, adjusting the veil that would complete her wedding outfit. It is natural to be nervous, she said kindly. Marriage is a big step, but Señor Tom is a good man. He will take care of you. Mrs. Garcia, Sarah said hesitantly, may I ask you something? Of course, Mika. How did you know when you met your husband that he was the right man for you? Mrs. Garcia smiled, her eyes growing soft with memory. Ah, that is a good question. When I first met my Miguel, I was very young, maybe 17. My parents had arranged the marriage and I was frightened. I did not know this man at all. She sat down on the edge of the bed and patted Sarah's hand. But on our wedding day, when I looked into his eyes during the ceremony, I saw something there that told me everything would be all right. I saw kindness and respect and a promise that he would always try to make me happy. And did he? Sarah asked. See, for 35 years, until God called him home. We had our troubles, like all married people, but we loved each other truly. Sarah nodded, but her heart felt heavy. She cared about Tom, but when she looked into his eyes, she did not see the same deep connection that Mrs. Garcia was describing. What she saw was affection, certainly, and respect, but not the kind of love that could sustain a marriage through 35 years of joys and troubles. After Mrs. Garcia left her to finish preparing, Sarah sat at her window looking out over the beautiful valley where she might spend the rest of her life. The sun was shining, and the mountains looked magnificent against the clear blue sky. It was a perfect day for a wedding, but as she watched, she saw James leading a group of horses from the pasture toward the barn. Even from a distance, she could see the set of his shoulders, the way he moved with unconscious grace. Her heart ached as she thought about the choice she had to make. She could marry Tom and have security, a comfortable home, and a respectable life. She would be the wife of a successful rancher, with everything she had dreamed of when she answered his advertisement. But she would also be living with the knowledge that she had chosen safety over love. Or she could follow her heart and choose James, knowing that it would mean scandal, financial uncertainty, and the loss of everything Tom had worked to build. James would lose his partnership, his home, and possibly his livelihood. And she would be responsible for destroying the friendship between two men who had saved each other's lives during the war. As she was wrestling with these thoughts, there was another knock at her door. This time it was Tom, dressed in his best suit and looking handsome and confident. "May I come in?" he asked. "I know it is not traditional for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony, but I wanted to speak with you privately." Sarah nodded, and Tom entered the room, closing the door behind him. He looked at her with admiration and satisfaction. "You look beautiful, Sarah. I am a very lucky man." "Thank you," she said, though her voice came out smaller than she intended. Tom moved closer and took her hands in his. "Sarah, I want you to know how grateful I am that you came here. I know this has all happened very quickly, and I know you have had to make some difficult adjustments, but I believe we can be very happy together." Sarah looked up at him, seeing the genuine affection in his eyes. Tom was a good man, and he deserved to marry someone who could love him wholeheartedly. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was being unfair to everyone involved, including herself. "Tom," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made him frown with concern. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything. "I cannot marry you." Tom stared at her in shock. "What did you say?" "I cannot marry you," Sarah repeated, her voice growing stronger. "It would not be fair to either of us. You deserve to marry someone who loves you completely, and I cannot give you that." Tom's face went through a series of emotions, confusion, hurt, and then anger. "Is this about James?" he asked, his voice sharp. Sarah felt her cheeks flush, but she met his gaze steadily. "Partly, yes. But it is also about doing what is right." "What is right?" Tom repeated, his voice rising. "What is right is honoring your commitment. You came here to marry me. We have been planning this wedding for days. There are 50 people downstairs waiting for the ceremony." "I know," Sarah said, tears starting to flow. "I know how difficult this makes things, but marrying you when I do not love you the way you deserve would be much worse." Tom turned away from her and walked to the window, his hands clenched into fists. "This is about James," he said again. "I should have seen it. The way you look at each other, the way he has been avoiding you. My best friend and my bride." "Tom, James never did anything inappropriate. He never tried to win my affections. If anything, he tried to stay away from me." "But you fell in love with him anyway." Sarah closed her eyes. "Yes." Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and controlled. "And what does James say about all this? Is he planning to marry you instead?" "We have not made any plans," Sarah said honestly. "I do not even know if he would still want to marry me after the trouble this will cause." Tom laughed bitterly. "Oh, I think you can count on that. James has always been too noble for his own good. He will probably insist on doing the right thing, even if it ruins his life." He turned back to face her, and Sarah could see the pain beneath his anger. "Do you have any idea what this will do to our partnership? To everything we have built here?" "I know it will be difficult," Sarah said, "but living a lie would be worse." Tom stared at her for another long moment, then shook his head. "I suppose I should admire your honesty. Not many women would have the courage to call off a wedding at the last minute." "I am sorry, Tom. I am so very sorry." "So am I," he said quietly. "I thought you were different from other women. I thought you understood what was important." Before Sarah could respond, Tom left the room, closing the door with more force than necessary. Sarah sank into a chair, her whole body trembling. She had done it. She had called off the wedding. Now she had to face the consequences. Within minutes, she could hear raised voices from downstairs as Tom told everyone that the wedding was canceled. She heard Mrs. Garcia crying and the sounds of confused guests asking what had happened. Then she heard heavier footsteps on the stairs, and her door opened again. This time it was James, his face pale with shock and concern. "Sarah, what have you done?" he asked. "I told Tom the truth," she said simply, "that I cannot marry him when I love someone else." James closed the door and leaned against it, as if he needed the support. "Do you realize what this means?" "It means a lot of people are going to be very angry with us," Sarah said. "It means you will probably lose your partnership with Tom and your home here. It means I will be known as the woman who jilted Tom Brennan at the altar." "And knowing all that, you still chose to stop the wedding?" Sarah stood up and walked toward him. "James, yesterday you told me I deserved to marry someone I love. Well, I realized that Tom deserves the same thing. It would have been wrong to marry him knowing that I could never love him the way he deserves." James looked into her eyes and she could see him struggling with his emotions. "Sarah, I want to marry you more than I have ever wanted anything in my life, but I cannot let you sacrifice your reputation and security for me unless you are absolutely certain it is what you want." "I am certain," Sarah said firmly. "I would rather face an uncertain future with you than a comfortable life without love." James stepped forward and took her hands. "Then we had better get out of here before Tom changes his mind about being civilized about this. Where will we go? I have a little money saved, enough to get us to Denver or maybe even California. We can start over somewhere new." Sarah nodded, feeling both frightened and exhilarated. "What should I pack?" "Only what you can carry easily. We should leave soon, while everyone is still downstairs dealing with the situation." As Sarah quickly packed her few belongings into her traveling bag, she could hear the sounds of the wedding guests beginning to leave. Some sounded sympathetic, others scandalized. She felt terrible about the embarrassment she was causing. But she also felt a sense of relief that she had not made a mistake that would have ruined 3 lives. James returned 20 minutes later with his horse saddled and ready to travel. He had also saddled a gentle mare for Sarah to ride. "Are you ready?" he asked. Sarah took one last look around the room that had been her home for less than 2 weeks. Then she picked up her bag and followed James downstairs. The house was nearly empty now, with most of the guests having left in confusion and disappointment. Tom was nowhere to be seen, but Mrs. Garcia was in the kitchen, cleaning up the remains of what should have been a wedding feast. When she saw Sarah and James with their traveling bags, her eyes filled with tears. "You are leaving?" she said, not really asking. "Yes," Sarah said gently. "Mrs. Garcia, I am sorry for all the trouble I have caused. You have been so kind to me." Mrs. Garcia embraced her warmly. "You are young, mija. You must follow your heart. I understand this, even if I do not like it." She turned to James. "Take care of her, Senor James. She is a good woman." "I will," James promised. As they led their horses away from the house, Sarah turned back one more time. She saw Tom standing at an upstairs window watching them leave. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and she saw not anger, but sadness in his expression. She raised her hand in a small gesture of goodbye, and after a moment he nodded slightly before turning away from the window. They rode toward town in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what they were leaving behind and what uncertain future lay ahead of them. But as they reached the top of the ridge that overlooked the valley, James pulled his horse to a stop. "Sarah," he said, "are you sure about this? There is still time to go back if you have changed your mind." Sarah looked back at the ranch one more time, then at the man beside her. In his eyes, she saw not just love, but understanding, respect, and a willingness to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," she said. James smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him since her arrival. "Then let's go build a new life together." They rode toward Cedar Ridge, and the stagecoach that would take them away from the mountains toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Behind them, the scandal of the broken wedding would become local legend. Some would say that Sarah Mitchell was a foolish woman who gave up security for romance. Others would say she was brave enough to choose love over convenience. But Sarah herself never looked back with regret. She and James settled in California, where he used his knowledge of ranching to build a successful business training horses. They married quietly in a small ceremony with only strangers as witnesses, but their marriage was based on the deep love and mutual respect that Sarah had realized was missing from her relationship with Tom. Years later, when they had built their own successful ranch and raised 3 children together, Sarah would sometimes think about that day when she had called off her wedding. It had taken tremendous courage to admit that she was making a mistake and to choose an uncertain future over a comfortable one. Tom Brennan eventually remarried to a widow from Denver who came to love the mountains as much as he did. They built a successful life together, and though Tom never spoke of Sarah Mitchell, those who knew him said he seemed genuinely happy with his new wife. The partnership between Tom and James never recovered, but both men eventually prospered in their separate endeavors. Years later, when they occasionally encountered each other at cattle auctions or other business events, they were polite but distant. The war that had brought them together seemed far less significant than the woman who had come between them. But Sarah and James never regretted their choice. They had built their marriage on a foundation of true love and mutual respect, and it proved strong enough to weather all the challenges that frontier life could bring. Their children grew up hearing the story of their parents' dramatic courtship, and they learned that sometimes the most important decisions in life require the courage to follow your heart, even when it means giving up everything you thought you wanted. On quiet evenings, when Sarah and James sat on the porch of their California ranch watching the sunset, they would sometimes talk about those few dramatic weeks in Colorado when their lives had changed forever. They never regretted the choice they had made, because they had learned that a marriage without love is no marriage at all. and that true happiness can only come when you have the courage to be honest about what your heart truly desires. The story of Sarah Mitchell and the choice she faced between two good men became part of frontier folklore, told and retold around campfires and in saloons throughout the West. But for those who lived it, it was simply the story of three people who learned that sometimes doing the right thing requires tremendous sacrifice, and that love without honesty and respect cannot survive the challenges that life inevitably brings. In the end, Sarah's decision to follow her heart rather than her head proved to be the right choice, not just for herself, but for all three people involved. Tom found happiness with someone who could love him completely. James found the life partner he had always hoped for, and Sarah discovered that she had the courage to choose her own destiny, even when that choice came at a great cost. Their story became a testament to the truth that real love cannot be denied or ignored, and that the most difficult choices in life are often the ones that lead to the greatest happiness. In an era when women had few choices and were expected to accept whatever security was offered to them, Sarah Mitchell proved that sometimes the greatest security comes from having the courage to follow your heart.